Okay, today's daf is daf Mem Aleph. We're going to start by the Mishnah on Mem Amud Beis, but before we start, we'll quickly run through some of the things that we learned yesterday because there's so many different principles that we had to learn yesterday. We learned that if an Adon is involved in the marriage of his Evet, it's proof that the Adon had prior to that freed the Evet. We learned that if a Adon uses a star kedushin to complete two purposes, to complete two tasks, A is to free his Amma, and B to marry her, that's a machloikis between our mayor and the Chacham. Then we looked at other simonim that would indicate that someone had freed his Evet, and Reb Shmuel Levi taught us that if the Adon puts tefillin on the Evet, that would be an indication that the Evet had been freed, although if Stam the Evet put on tefillin in front of the Adon, or he borrowed money from the Evet, or he got an aliyah, or he made a shopper, thank you so much. These things would not be indications that the Adon has in fact freed the Evet. Then we had the Shaila of an Adon that said the Shas Misasoi, Ploinish of Chasi al Yishtabdu Ba, La'achamoisi. So that Nusach, the Gemara challenged it. Rav Dimi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that Nusach would say that the children have to free the Evet. Although there are those who said Rabbi Yochanan never said such a thing, because Al Yishtabdu Ba doesn't mean to free her. It just means you should let her take it easy. But she still remains with the status of a shivcha. Rather, Rabbi Ami Nabachi said, Rab Shmuel Bar Yehuda said, that what Rabbi Yochanan really said was if someone said, and therefore he tells the children, Yas Allah Kairas Ruach, there the children have to do whatever it takes to make her happy, up to and including freeing her. Then we had the takana, then we had the shaila again of a mafker abdoi yotzal cherus, but needs to get shikhr. Does the get shikhr? Is it possible for someone who is mafker ever to give a get shikhr? So that seems to be accepted. That surely you can give a get shikhr. The question was, if mafker abdoi mace, can the Yarshim give a get shikhr or not? There was a discussion that since the Yarshim weren't the Yarshim any monistic shavias, they don't have the ability to free the Eved with a get shikhr. That was a shaila, but if you remember, Ravina at the end said, Avada they could. Then we had the discussion of someone who tried to get out of being forced to freeing his Eved after his partner freed his half. And he tried giving it to children, to his child, but they got around that, Bezin got around that, and they were able to get the Eved to be freed anyway by dangling some shiny coins in front of the child who happened to have been old enough at that point to make the trade. Okay. Then we had the case of the two cases where the Gemara sets up similar halachas regarding Evet and regarding Karka. And if someone wrote in a star, I freed you, or I gave you this property as a matana, that is a good start to affect the sale. But if someone says in future tense, Esenu ben chayin, or I will give it to you, that's where there's a machlokes, Rebbe and the Chacham. Okay, gewaltig. The other case was, again, it applies equally to Evet and to a matana of karka, and that is, if a person says, I gave you the matana, or I freed the Evet, and the Evet says, no such thing, I was never freed. The Makabal Matana said, I was never given this Matana. The Makabal Matana is not believed, because it's possible that the Adon, if the Noisin was Mazaka to them through a third party and they didn't even know about it. But if the testimony of the Noisin or the Adon is, I gave the Shikhr directly to you, Mr. Evet, I gave the Shtar Matana directly to you, Mr. Recipient, and then he denies it, then it becomes a little bit of a suffix. And the Gemara ended up asking that if there's a denial from the Adon, from the Evet, or there's a denial from the Makabel, the payers get eaten by the nation, meaning we don't recognize the sale. But if the Makabel is not alive, and it's his children who say we don't recognize that our father was ever given this piece of property, but in fact the nation says I did give it, so there the nation is believed, and therefore I'm sorry, if they themselves are not sure, so then it's Mishal Shmos Paris, because they can't, with clarity, with Bari, they cannot deny that they received the field. They can't do that if their father received the field. Therefore, the payers are going to be put into escrow until we can figure out who owns the field. Now we're into a whole new subject. A poitiki is when someone designates a specific item to be used to pay back a chayiv that he owes. Evet also rabbi a poitiki la'acherim. So there was an evet, and his adon owed money, so he made the evet and the poitiki. He told the malva, "You will be paid back. You will be able to recover your funds from this evet." V'shichrei, and then this SOB went and freed the evet. That's like stabbing his malva in the back. Now I touched it v'shichrei as the adon harishon, freeing him. That's not necessarily the case. Shur Sadin, the right way to deal with this is Eino Evet Chayev Klub. The Evet is not Chayev anything. Why would Evet be Chayev anything? What did he do? He's an innocent bystander. Elam, if they Tikkun Olam, Kaifin is Rabbi, because the Tikkun Olam, they forced the Adon, the Oisai ben Chayrin. He just did it already. This doesn't make sense, this Mishnah, without the Gemara's explanation. So this is really very cryptic, this Mishnah. The Gemara is going to offer two pshatim in the Mishnah. Number one, who exactly freed this Evet? Rav learns pshat of the Mishnah is Rabbi Rishon. The first Adon, who really is the only owner, the Malva doesn't own this. The Malva might have a right to collect from it, but it's the loiva who owns this evet. It's the loiva who is the adon of this evet who freed this evet. So shur sadin eino evet chayev klum. To who? L'rabbi sheni. The evet doesn't owe any malacha l'rabbi sheni. Why is that? Why don't you say that the evet was meshubed to the rabbi sheni, to the malva, and the balti evet is meshubed to the malva? Maybe the loiva spring of the evet doesn't work because he's already meshubed to the malva. Even though there's a shibud of this evet to the malva, but shikhr has the power to pierce that shibud. Same thing with hektish. If someone had an animal that was meshubed to a malva to pay back a chayiv, and the loiva said harezu oila, it becomes a carbon oila, and the malva loses his right to collect from it. And the same thing is with chometz. If somebody has chometz that's meshubed to somebody, and Pesach comes, now if it's meshubed to a yid, the yid has the same problem. But even if it's meshubed to a goy, it's no longer meshubed to the goy. It becomes aser ba'ano, and again it breaks the shibud. So that's why the evet goes free. Elam, if they tikkun olam, because of tikkun olam, and we'll see what is the problem that could occur. What is the problem? Imagine the malva is not very happy. As far as he's concerned, this evet belongs to him because he wasn't able to collect. When he sees this evet walking around on the street, although he might have a misplaced anger because his beef is with the loiva, but he'll say in public, "V'yomer loy avdiata," you're an evet. So because we don't want that to occur, Kaifin is Rabbi Sheni the Oisa ben Chayrin, we force the malva to actually write a shtar shikhr, which really has no validity technically. It just to clarify the facts that this evet is free and he's a full Ben Yisrael, and in appreciation of getting that document, the Choysev Eved Shtar Al Damav. Now the Eved has to write an IOU note to the Malva for the amount of money that he's worth. Interesting. And Reb Shimon ben Gamliel said, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel in our Mishnah, Ein ha'eved koisei. The Eved didn't do anything. The Eved doesn't owe anybody any money. Ela mishachar koisei. It's the loiva who stabbed the Malva in the back and freed the apoitiki. That loiva has to write a shibud on the value of the loan. Okay, so let's stop here for a second. What is the concern? What is the concern that this Malva will be upset? He'll see the Eved walking down the street, and then he'll attack the Eved and say, "You are an Eved." What's the big deal? So Rashi says, "The Yosy las albana." It's gonna be Yosy las albana because his children are now the children of an Eved Shabal Bas Yisrael. The problem with that particular is, you know what we paskin l'gabe de shaila of Eved Habal Bas Yisrael? We paskin that avlat kosher. So what's the problem? So let's hear B'kiveg inside. Frek B'kiveg koshali hakaim along the Eved Habal Bas Yisrael havlat kosher. Ella, yes, there is a little bit of a problem. Ella the lahar b'poiskim hogum l'kahuna. So that's the whole thing, that we're afraid that the children won't be able to marry kahanim. And forget that. Why are we worried about his children? He's messing up the Eved himself. Why? You're telling everybody I'm an Eved. I'm gonna have a hell of a time doing a shidduch, finding a woman to marry me, Bas Yisrael, if people are talking about me that I'm an Eved. The who Eved, Umay Ulma Badav Mimenu. Why is Rashi coming to say that the Tikkun is about defending the reputation of his children? Why aren't we talking about protecting his own reputation? Rabbi Kiva doesn't answer here, but Rabbi Kiva does offer a teretz in Gilyon Hashas. I'm sorry, in Chedushim. In Chedushim, he says if it was him, so if someone would accost him in the street, you're an Eved, so then he could go to Bezdin, and then he would force a Yishtar to be written to exonerate him. But his children are going to be defenseless. And therefore, we have to preempt this possibility and get a star for them.
You see, I'm not understanding. What were the circumstances of his freedom exactly? And you raised the issue of, isn't it, there's a shikhr, it belongs, he really belongs to the loiva, doesn't he?
He belongs to the loiva, and in fact, the loiva freed him, so he is free.
No, I mean, sorry, to the malva. Once it's a pipe,
he doesn't believe that there's a shibud on him to the malva. He doesn't actually belong to the malva. He's currently working for the loiva.
Right.
There's a shibud that the malva has to give it, that the loiva will have to give it to the malva. It's like a lien.
It's like a mortgage, isn't it?
Correct.
Right.
But there's a chiddush that shikhr could break a mortgage. Hektish, chametz, and shikhr are able to break a mortgage. Unlike, you can't be makish a piece of karka, but you can't be mishacher a piece of karka, but you could be mishacher an evet. So even though there's a lien on the evet, shikhr has a strength that it could undo the shibud.
So he didn't do his due diligence, you're saying?
The Malva did his due diligence. He knew that he's susceptible to the loiva doing this to him, but he sort of the loiva didn't tell the Malva that he was going to do that. I don't think he's lending another penny to this loiva again, but he thought it was legit. Now it's not all bad, because it doesn't mean the Malva can't collect. The Malva can collect from other assets of the loiva, but he had his eyes on this evidence. That's what he was relying on. Now he has to do a search to see what other assets the loiva has. So, what is the machlokes between Reb Shimon ben Gamliel and the Rabbanon as to whether or not the loiva owes any money to the malva. If you're mazik, your friend shibud. So here, the loiva was mazik, the shibud of the malva. He destroyed the shibud by making shikra. Does that oblige him to pay? The ma'asaber chayiv. So Reb Shimon ben Gamliel holds chayiv, and therefore the loiva, the meshachar, has to be chayiv himself to the malva because of what he did. Umar saver potter, and the other one holds that it's potter. And therefore, it's only the reason why we have the Eved write this IOU note is, I guess, as a courtesy, because the Malva is giving him this get out of jail free card. It Marnami, we actually have a brisa that illustrates such a machlokes. Hamazik shibude shel chaverei. If someone damages the shibud of his friend, banu machlokes, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel v'Rabbanon, which in fact is the exact question in our Mishnah, according to Rav. Ula offered a different pshat in the Mishnah. Ula Amar, Mi Shichroi, when it said, Evet also Rabbi Poitiki Lacherim, the Shichroi, so Rav learned it was the Loiva who was Meshacharim. Ula says, no, Rabbi Sheni, his second Adon, the Malva freed him. Now, right away, you're going to ask, the Malva doesn't own this Evet. So the Malva Shikhr has zero validity. We're going to see why it does have an impact. So Shur Sadin, Ein ha'eved chayiv klum b'mitzvahs. Me'ikar adin, an eved would not be b'chayiv b'mitzvahs because the eved is still an eved, because the shikhr of the malva has zero validity. The Rashi Ein ha'eved chayiv klum b'mitzvahs. Hanoihagos b'vnei chayrin yoshim b'avadim. Sure, he's still b'chayiv in the mitzvah of avodim, but he's not b'chayiv in mitzvahs of b'nei chayrin because he's not a ben chayrin. Shaloi ha'yakani loy. He didn't belong to the Malva, and therefore the shikhr of the Rav Sheni of the Malva has zero validity. So why do we need to do anything at all? What is the Tikkun Olam? When the Malva announced to the world and gave him a star shikhr, that created a koil. So people think that this man is now a ben chayrin, yet he's not going to be doing mitzvahs. That's not looking good. So therefore, Kaipanis Rabbi Rishon, the Isa ben Chayrin, we force the real Adon, the Loiva, to truly free this Evet, and then the Chaysev and the Bach very importantly sticks in the Chaysev Evet Star Aldama. The Loiva is only freeing the Evet because of this Tikkun Olam thing. People think he's free, so we need to make him free. But the loiva, although he has to free the eved, he shouldn't have to suffer the financial consequences of doing so. Therefore, the eved will have to write an IOU note to the loiva, who truly is his owner. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, you know who has to write an IOU note? The mishachwer, which is the malva, has to write an IOU note, because the malva just messed me up, because I was planning to pay back with this eved, and now I have to free this eved. I have nothing left with which to pay back. So the Meshaker has to write an IOU note for the amount of the eved that's worth more than the choy. The letter of the choy was $100,000. The value of the eved was $75,000. The loiva only owed $75,000, but he had to free an eved that was worth $100,000. So the malva has to write an IOU note to the loiva for $25,000. Zokt Rashi, al damav ha'oitzim al chayv, that's more than the chayv. Einay kaisev, ein eved kaisev lo shum star. The eved doesn't write it. The ma'avid the eved did nothing wrong. Iu lo garam lo midi. It wasn't his fault that the malva freed him. Al meshachar kaisev lo star lo oidim. The meshachar, the malva, writes a star to the loiva to compensate him for the value of the eved that was worth more than the chayv. Why should the malva have to pay back or not? The hezek sheyinikah coming. The machlokes is, if I do damage to somebody, but the damage is not seeable because it's a isur v'heter thing, the person still looks the same. You can't see if he's an eved or if he's not an eved. That's called the hezek sheyinikah. Similar to someone who's matama somebody else's tires. you can't see the tumah. Mar saber shmei hezek, umar saber lo shmei hezek, as Rashi says. Ula Tanakama lo shmei hezek. According to the Tanakana, the malva has absolutely no liability to the loiva, even though he caused that the loiva should have to free his evet. But hezek sheni nikar lo shmei hezek. Lefichach ein lanu lechayiv es meshacher. Therefore, the malva shouldn't be mechuyev for freeing the evet, because he didn't do anything really. He just caused this takana to happen. But the evet now is getting his freedom, free of charge. Therefore, the evet the evet will have, the takana is the evet has to pay back what he benefited. Gewaltig. While Shimon Gamliel says that the Meshachar, the malva has to pay because hezek sheni nikar is shmei. So those are the two shotim we have in our Mishnah. Correct the Gemara, Ula my time aloy amar karav. Why didn't Ula say like Rav? Why couldn't Ula learn that it was the loiva who freed the Eved and not the malva? Amalach, it's very simple. Sheni, Rabbi, Chorus, lay. It says that Koifinis Rabbi va'isa ben Chayrin. That's what the Mishnah says. If, according to Rav, if the loiva freed the Eved, you'll force the malva to free the Eved as well. But it doesn't say you'll force the malva to free the Eved. It's Koifinis Rabbi. You force its owner, but the malva is not its owner. So Ula had a problem with the Mishnah saying Koifinis Rabbi, because the malva is not his rabbi at all. Rav, my time aloy Omar Ula. Why didn't Rav like Ula's pshat that the Meshachar was the malva? Dr. Gemara, same thing. Amar Loch, Sheni Meshachar Karis Lay. When it says a Meshachar is Eved, you consider the malva a Meshachar. The malva doesn't own this Eved. The malva can't be Meshachar. So either one has a nakuda in which the lashon of the Mishnah doesn't jive with the other one's pshat. Itmar Dr. Heilig Gemara. But Oita Sadeu Apoitiki. Someone made his field into an apoitiki. Apoitiki is designating that this should be used to pay back the chayv. Now, there's actually different levels of apoitiki. Some levels of apoitiki is, yes, this is something you can rely on, but sometimes it means that this is what's going to pay back the chayv and nothing else. And no other of my nechasim are meshubed to pay back the chayv other than this itself, which gives the malva a much stronger grasp in the piece of property or in whatever it was that was designated as that point. In this case, we are talking about a piece of property, Vishat Fanor. And due to global warming and the rising of the ocean tide, this land now became submerged. So it went from a full value to zero. So the halacha is, Ami Shapri Noah, Am Rabbi Yochanan. The good-looking Ami, I guess there was the ugly Ami and there was the good-looking Ami. The good-looking Ami told, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, said, Ein goiva mishar nechasim. It's a funny lashon. The Gemara is talking about an Amoira, someone who's mentioned in the Gemara is Gabaltig, yet he was a good-looking guy, and his nickname was the good-looking Ami. The good-looking Ami said, Ein goiva mishar nechasim. In other words, that was his shibud, and therefore he doesn't have a shibud on any other of the nechasim the loiva. No, he could run from others. Zog to Gemara, Amar Nachman bar Yitzchak, Mishum the Ami Shapri no, because he's good looking. Amar Shmaita the Loy Shapirin. What do you think we're so dazzled by his looks, so we'll accept whatever he says, even though what he says is not logical? Why would you say that he doesn't have access to any other of the Loiva's properties? Dr. Gemara to Targum Shmaitze. Let's say that under what conditions did Reb Ami Shaper Noah say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that he can't collect from anything else? Is the Omerle Lo Yehelach Piroin El Mizu. It wasn't just an apoitiki that you should collect from. Rather, he said this is the only place where you're going to collect from. Let's see what Rashi says. Aval Omerle Imloi Praticha Gava Mizu. If he said Lo Yehelach Piroin El Mizu, there, if it gets ruined, too bad for the malva, because he's basically saying this is your payment. But what if he just said, if I don't have money to pay you, you can take from this? That's not so dedicated to the malva. That's not considered in the rishus of the malva. V'lav adaita the da luchudos pay. And clearly the Malva knew that that was an option from which to collect, but he also had full interest in collecting from any other assets of the loiva. And therefore it's not the Malva's problem. So depending on how detailed this dedication was, that will determine if the shibud is only on that or if the shibud is on all the assets of the loiva. If you said lo yehei lach piroin elamizu, that's saying this is your payment, nothing else is mishubit. But if you just said, if I don't have money, you can take from here, well, that is a different story. That the shibud is on the shibud is on everything. Hani nami hachi. We had another brayso that supports this halacha. Ha'oisa sudeyu apoitegi la'acher. Someone made his the poitegi to a third party, to a malva. The shat v'nar, and the property got ruined. Goyve mishar nechasim. A father he can collect from other nechasim. In other words, kloimar em yirtza moicher es elu ben goyve min ashar. He could the loiva could even sell it, and he could collect from other properties. There it's einu goyve mishar nechas. Tanya Yidach, we had another brayso. Ha'oisdei apoitegi l'ba'choyv or l'ksubus isha goyve mishar nechasim. And actually, that's what Rashi was on. Goyve mishar nechasim means even if the loiva decides to sell that property, if there's other properties that the loiva owns, the malva can collect from those other properties. By a b'choyv, we always say that a poitegi doesn't really mean this is the only place you're collecting from. We say it means this is an option from which you could collect if you cannot find from where to collect. But ksubas isha is different. Isha eina goyve mishar nechasim, because ksubas isha by default is a full apoiteki. When he designated it's a piece of land, he means that this is the only land from which you're going to collect, and I'm dedicating this land to you. Why is that? A woman can't start doing title searches to figure out what other properties are owned by her husband. A woman doesn't do such things. Therefore, we say that when a certain property is designated to her ksuba, that's it. That's it, and nothing else. And she has a strong tfisa on that piece of property, because it's not expected that she'll do searches like a regular malva might do. Okay, beautiful. So we learned today about takanas of people selling avodim. We learned two new concepts. We learned if there's a chiyuv, if you're mazak shibudei shel chaveroi. We learned a machloikis of hezek sheni nikrish mehezek. We learned this new phenomena of hektish chametz b'shichur ma'timi de shibud, and we learned that there's different types of apoitekis, different levels of designations, and depending on the level of designation, it's possible that all the other nechasim of the loiva are still meshubah to the malva, or it's possible that the shibud is only on that specific piece of property. Someone who's half and half, that's why one day he works for his adoin, and the next day he's free, so he works for himself. And this is a sustainable situation. This is not a sustainable situation. Tekatim is rabbi. The adoin hasn't made it in the shade. He has Evan working for him. But the Evan himself is messed up. Why? Lisa shivcha efsher shevek kesem bin chayrin. He can't marry a shivcha because of the tat chayris shaboy. And bas chayrin efsher, and he can't marry a bas chayrin either. Shekvar chatze evet, because he's a half an evet. Yavatel, are you going to suggest he should stay single? The world was created for Perya Verevi. So you would think the Mishnah would quote Shenemar Puravu, but that's not what the Mishnah quoted. Shenemar Loisayu Bara. HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't create the land to remain desolate. Lo Sheves Yitzara. So I was going to comment that Huadin, a man can't marry a man because Loisayu Bara Lo Sheves Yitzara. But just to say that a man can't have children is in and of itself could be apicursus in today's crazy day and age. Elam, if they Tikkun Olam, because of Tikkun Olam, what we do is, let's see the Bach. Koivines Rabbi, we forced the Adon, but Oisai ben Chayrin, and he frees the Eved, the Choysim Star al Chatidamov. And of course, since the Eved is getting freed by this Adon, he has to write an IOU note for the value that this Adon was giving up. And eventually, the Chazru Beis Hillel Laharis Kedivir Beis Shammai, even Beis Hillel turned around and agreed with Beis Shammai. So there's a couple of interesting shilas that Tosfos discusses. Tosfos first discusses why can't he marry a shivcha. Tosfos asks, even if he could marry a shivcha, he won't be mekayim perior berivia because of that, because she's an evet she'ein lechayis. So Tosfos yeshleimedim hayachal akayim sheves koldehu mishum mitzvos puravu lechudei lehava kafin lerabbi v'loy mechiyava kivin anasu. Puravu, Tosfos says in his first teretz, is if it's an oinus, if puravu is an oinus, we won't force it. But l'sheves yitzara, that we do force. What's the difference? What the mitzvah is if it's an oinus, it's an oinus. So, I forgot who he quoted from. He said a gewaltige shtickle. He said there's two types of mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do a ma'aseh, and there's a mitzvah where Hashem wants you to actually accomplish something. For instance, there's a ma'aseh you have to put on tefillin. If you can't put on tefillin, it's an oinus. But bikar chaylim, the mitzvah is to go make somebody feel good. If your car breaks down, you couldn't go. You weren't mekayim the mitzvah. You didn't make that person feel good. So that's the difference between puravu. Puravu is a mitzvah on the person to do. It's a chiyuv of a ma'aseh. A chiyuv of a ma'aseh, you could say oinus patre. But loisoy bar l'shevi yitzara means it's incumbent on everybody to populate the world. That the Kodesh Baruch Hu, the mitzvah is looking for a result. There, the svara of oinus won't work. So there's another pshat. The chima akra lav loy mekayim asay. You couldn't say asay deichaloisase by the bia, by the iser is by the tchilas bia, but the gemar bia is when pregnancy can occur, and therefore by l'sayu bar l'shavas yitzara is where there would be a problem with that. Okay, and then he says v'oyde b'didal leka say afilu mivkeda efshir la b'chayotzeba. Oh, she doesn't have an essay, but because by her there's no essay. So therefore you cannot say essay dechalosh, that's for him, but what about for her? Then the Tosfos asks, why can't he sell himself as an Eved Ivri? Because an Eved Ivri is muter b'shivcha, and then he has an Eitzah Puravu. So Tosfos answers, because Ger Meshucher Einim Karim B'Avri Mishum Dabina B'Shavel Mishpachtli, so you cannot marry a shivcha. So then Tosfos asks, what about half a shivcha, half a baschorin? But then there's a problem with his tzad avdus as being pageya in the tzad yehadus of the woman. The other question Tosfos discusses on here is, I don't understand. Oh, another reason why Tosfos says chaps puravu is because it's a mitzvah rabbi. Soyabar is a big mitzvah. It's a bigger mitzvah. So the Gemara felt more confident with that mitzvah. The second, the Rivam's Tosfos brings down, says that the mitzvah l'shavas yitzara even applies to an eved, but puravu is a mitzvah that only applies to a yid. So those are the different reasons why Tosfos suggests the Gemara, the Mishnah chapton l'shavas yitzara rather than puravu. Then the next question is, we know that it's also to free an eved. So just because this eved has a mitzvah, you force the adam to free? You never find that you'll make Reuben do an avera to protect Shimon from doing an avera. So Tosfos answers, where did we learn that you don't make Reuben do an avera to save Shimon? That's if Shimon did something wrong. He put a dough into an oven. So there we tell Reuben do an avera to take, or we tell Reuben don't do an avera to take the bread out of the oven before it bakes, which will prevent Shimon from being over, because we're not going to have you do an avera to save Shimon's avera. The Tosfos there, we don't have you do that because Shimon was a Pesheah. Who told Shimon to put it in the oven? But here, what did David do wrong? David did nothing wrong at all. He was put into this position, and that's why we're going to So we're going to force the other to free him because it's not the Evet's fault that he's in this pitch. He's Zok to Gemara. If someone is Meshacher half of his Evet. So up until now, how was he half? Evet happened Chayrin. He belonged to two owners, and one of the owner completely freed his Chayrin. But what if there's a sole owner, and the sole owner wants to free half of his Evet? Will that work? Rabbi Amar Kana, the have a Chetze ben Chayrin, as Rashi says, the Chamar Kana. A Shicher doesn't work halfway. So Amar Rabbi, Zok Rabbi, he qualifies. Machlokes b'shtar. Where is there a machlokes whether or not you can free an Evet halfway? That if you wrote a star and say Arat ben Chayrin. So you're either all ben Chayrin or you're all not a ben Chayrin. Can't be halfway. The Rebbe holds there happens to be a hekesh between the freedom of an Evet through pigeon and the freedom of an Evet through shichur. Because in the parsha of Asham Shivcha Charufa, we had this pasuk before. The Torah says, "V'havte lo niftasa, or chopte lo nitala." So we're comparing these two ways for an Evet to acquire their freedom, either through redemption or through a star. And we're comparing them. Makish star lekesef. We're saying that the freedom of star works like kesef. Ma kesef ben kulei ben chetzet. Just like by kesef, an Evet can be fully redeemed, but an Evet can also be partially redeemed. Afshtar nami ben kulei ben chetzet. So Rabbi wants to say through the hekesh of the Yitzia of pigeon to the Yitzia of star, we learn that the Yitzia of star can also be halfway. For Rabbanon, they say, no, we don't follow the hekesh, we follow the Gzeir Shava. Gomri law me'isha. We have the word law but here by Shecher in the same pasuk. We have the word law by the chas of law by a get. Ma'isha chetzeloi, avev nami chetzeloi. The same way you can't divorce a woman halfway, you cannot divorce an Evet halfway. Apple b'kesef, but if the pigeon was kesef, divrei akoil kana. And therefore, everybody would agree that it would work. Peduya ve'ena betuya, and therefore it would be partially redeemed and partially not redeemed because you can redeem halfway. Let's say this is the machlokes as to whether or not to say that a shtar shircha could be only on half an evet. The Marshav a kesha adifa. One man holds the hekesh is other, and the hekesh compares the shikhr, the shtar shikhr, to pigeon, which means it could be done halfway. Let's ignore the hekesh to pigeon and let's compare it to a get isha, which doesn't work halfway. That's not the machlok. Everybody else gzer shava is adifa because Rashi says that you can't make your own gzer shava. You have it mikabola. That's something much serious. It carries a lot more weight. The shiny yachid, the problem here is this is not mufta mishnei tzadin, and therefore you can ask a kash on the gzer shava to shlug it up. Mali isha, you know why isha is all or nothing? There is no way to divorce a woman by giving her kesef. From the fact that an evet can be redeemed and there have a partial redemption, maybe its halacha of shtar shikwer is also different than that of an isha. So the question is on the validity of the Xereshah. That was Rabbi's opinion. Rabbi Yosef Amar, he says differently. Machlokes bekesef. They're arguing even if you could make a pigeon halfway. The Rabbi Savar of a haftalah neftasa, and therefore ptuya vein ptuya. Rabbi holds from the pasuk of a haftalah neftasa. This pasuk seems to be saying it's partially redeemed. This evidence is partially redeemed, or in that pasuk was talking about a shivcha who's partially redeemed. So you see, by kesef at least you can have a partial redemption. For abundance Avri, dibra ter kaloshim b'nei adam. The haftalah neftasa doesn't mean it's partial. It means that's how people talk. And redeemed, she wasn't redeemed, meaning that she's not redeemed at all. Aval b'shtar, but if it's with a star, divra koilekam. So the machlokes is very simple. Are they arguing only by star, but by pigeon everybody agrees it works? Or do you say by star nobody holds it works, and this question is only by pigeon? Meisei frak Gemara. Hamashacher chatzi avdoi b'shtar. The Brisa says if someone is mashacher half of his eved with a star, Rabbi Omer kana, v'chachamim Omer lo kana. So isn't this black and white saying that there's actually a machlokes by star? So tiyuf to the Rabbi Yosef, because Rabbi Yosef said that the machlokes is only by kesef and not by star, Yet we have a brayso that says meferish that the machlokes is by star. Zok tomorrow, are you going to suggest that tiyufta? Zok to Gemara, yes, it seems like Rabbi Yosef is other slogan because you have a clear brayso that says they argue by star. But there's another thing that Rabbi Yosef said. Rabbi Yosef said that they're not arguing by kesef. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yosef holds that they are arguing by kesef, right? Rabbi Yosef said they argue by kesef, and even by kesef, Rabbi holds it works, and the Rabbanan hold not. So Zok to Gemara, Yoftan, the star who the pligi, avo the kesef loy pligi. It's mashma from this brayso that they argue by star, but by kesef everyone's moida, because the brayso says the shiloh between Rebbe and the Chachamim is only in a case of star. It says a mashachar chatzi avdo b'star. If the machlokes is also by kesef, shouldn't it have said hamashachar chatzi avdo b'star? Oy misha pada chatzi eved. You'd have the same machlokes, but the machlokes in the brayso is only cited by star, which would indicate that by kesef everybody would agree it works. Where Rabbi Yosef said that even by, or Rabbi Yosef said only by kesef is it a machlokes. So that Rabbi Yosef stated that there's no machlokes by star, that's for sure he's August. But that he said that there is a machlokes by pidyon, is that consistent with this brayso or not? Because the brayso should have also cited that as an example of where there's a machlokes, according to Rabbi Yosef. So let me have a tube to Rabbi Yosef, betarti. Maybe both things that Rabbi Yosef said should be contradicted. Rabbi Yosef, no. Peligi b'shtar b'udim b'kesef. So if they're arguing by kesef, why didn't the brayso list that as one of the cases as well? Because our main focus is showing Rebbe's koyach that even b'shtar halfway works. Why didn't you say the machlokes should have been by kesef, and they were to show their rabbanon holds even by kesef you can do halfway? We'd rather highlight the koyach tatera that a Rebbe holds that even a star can be halfway, than highlight the shita of the chachamim that even kesef can't be halfway. Tashma, v'heftei. The brayso says v'heftei, which is referring to the pasuk by the parish of Shechet Charupa, Bavtel and Neftaso, Yochel Lakol. You might think that this woman, this shivcha, was completely freed. Talmud Omer lo neftaso. She wasn't completely freed. Lo neftaso Yochel Lakol. Maybe she's a complete shivcha. Talmud Omer v'heftei. Haketzad, how will we understand what the pasuk is referring to? Keduya ve'ena betuya. She was redeemed halfway. The kesef u'b'shava kesef. How was she redeemed halfway? With kesef or shava kesef. Ve'enli ela b'kesef b'shtar minayin. I only know that you could redeem someone halfway with kesef. How do I know that you can also free an eved partially with a shtar? Talmud loymar v'havta lo niftasa, and then there's a hekesh oy chubta lo nitin lo, which is the same limud that we had earlier. Later on it says, the chosav lo sefer krisos. Malalon b'shtar, just like by a get isha, the sefer krisos is a shtar, afkan b'shtar, so too it works here with the shtar as well. Ainli elechetzav v'kesef, oikuli b'shtar. I would have only known from learning it from get isha that you could be paid halfway with kesef, and although a shtar works, it only works fully, like an eved. Where do you see that you could even free half of the eved with shtar? So this is basically repeating what we've already learned earlier. According to Rabbi Yosef, after he was slugged up. So after he was slugged up, what is the halacha l'maaseh? After he was slugged up, the halacha l'maaseh is the argument is by shtar, right? The argument is by shtar, and even by mama, right? Because once Rabbi Yosef got slugged up, it proved that they're arguing by shtar. But Rabbi Yosef also had to argue by mama. So they're arguing in both cases. So according to Rabbi Yosef, Hamani Rebbe will say that this brayso is going according to Rebbe, who holds that tzai by shtar, tzai by kesef, you couldn't be paida halfway. According to Rabbah, who says that by kesef, everybody agrees that you could be paida halfway, and it's only by shtar where there's a shaila. Reisha divrei hakoil. The ratio of this brisa, which is talking about pidyon of mammon, is according to everybody, because everybody agrees that you could be paid halfway through mammon, according to Rabbah. The sefer that says that by star you can also be paid halfway is only going according to Rebbe. Is that logical? That the ratio is according to everybody, but the sefer is only going according to Rebbe? Amalek Rabba in. That's exactly what I'm going to learn shot. Ratio de V'Rakoil, the sefer Rebbe. About it. Rabbi Ashi Omar, Rabbi Ashi says, Rebbe. Rabbi Ashi says that our Mishnah is going only according to Rebbe. In other words, Dr. Rashi, Rebbe Amar L'chulei. Rebbe is the author of the whole Mishnah. The Islay B'Tavayo Kana. Because Rebbe holds side by star it works halfway, and side by mamona works halfway. Rabbanan iflu galel ba'alma ashtar v'lo kesef. The Rabbanan happen to disagree with Rebbe's opinion by star, but not by kesef. But the author of the Mishnah is Rebbe. Just because the Rabbanan agreed to Rebbe, that doesn't mean Rebbe couldn't have been the author of this brisa. So that's how Rav Ashi learns. Zok Gemara, we're going to stop here. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll be mamshech here tomorrow.